"You're leaving," Min-jun whispered to the empty office, his hands trembling as he held Elena's resignation letter. The paper dampened from raindrops that had somehow found their way inside, or perhaps from tears he refused to acknowledge. 3 months. That's all it had taken for Elena Rossi to dismantle walls he had built over decades. 3 months to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, someone could love Choi Min-jun, the man, instead of coveting Choi Min-jun, the fortune. And now Marco was back, her ex-boyfriend from Milan, promising her everything Min-jun couldn't. Normalcy, a life without bodyguards and board meetings, a love uncomplicated by billion-dollar decisions and family dynasties. The elevator chimed behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know it was her. He had memorized the rhythm of her heels on marble, the way she hummed Italian melodies under her breath when she thought no one was listening, the scent of jasmine perfume that somehow made the corporate air breathable. Min-jun, Elena's voice carried that familiar accent that had first annoyed him, then charmed him, and now threatened to destroy him. "We need to talk." He turned slowly, drinking in the sight of her one last time. Honey brown hair catching the harsh office lights, hazel green eyes reflecting his own pain. Her usually warm smile replaced by the kind of determined expression that meant she had already made her decision. She wore the beige blazer he had bought her in Tokyo, not because she needed his money, but because he had noticed her admiring it in a shop window and wanted to see her face light up. The memory felt like a knife between his ribs. "Marco is waiting downstairs," she continued, and each word felt like another nail in the coffin of whatever they had built together. "He wants me to come back to Milan. He says he's changed, that he understands my ambitions now. He's offering me partnership in his architecture firm, a chance to design across Europe." Min-jun's jaw clenched. Of course Marco was offering her partnership. Marco didn't have to worry about whether Elena loved him for his money, because Marco didn't have the kind of money that corrupted everything it touched. Marco could offer her simplicity, authenticity, a love that didn't come with stock reports and death threats from business rivals. "And what do you want?" The question escaped before he could stop it, before his pride could lock it away with all the other vulnerable words he had learned never to speak. Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tears she was fighting back, close enough that her familiar jasmine scent made his chest ache with longing. "I want to know if you're willing to fight for this, for us. Because if you are, Min-jun, if you can trust me enough to let me choose you without fearing that I'm after your fortune, then I'll tell Marco that some things are worth more than security." The city lights blurred below them, and Min-jun realized this was the moment that would define everything. The moment when he could either let fear win again, or finally trust in something more powerful than the fortune that had protected and imprisoned him for 32 years. What would you do if the person offering you everything safe and familiar stood in the way of a love that could either heal your heart or destroy it completely? This is the story of Elena and Min-jun, where trust becomes the most valuable currency of all. 6 weeks earlier, Min-jun had been living his perfectly controlled life with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., his alarm would sound in the penthouse apartment that overlooked the Han River. By 6:15, he was in his private gym. By 7:30, his driver was navigating Seoul traffic, while Min-jun reviewed overnight reports from New York and London offices. By 8:04 a.m. sharp, he was at his desk on the 47th floor of Choi Tower, ready to make decisions that would affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars. It was a life that worked because it was predictable. Predictable meant safe. Safe meant no one could get close enough to betray him. Then Elena Rossi walked into his office carrying fabric samples and completely disrupted 20 years of careful emotional architecture. "Mr. Choi," she had said in that melodic Italian accent, not bowing deeply like his Korean employees, not averting her eyes like most people did when meeting the heir to one of Korea's largest conglomerates. Instead, she looked directly at him with those hazel green eyes and smiled like they were equals. "I'm Elena, your new interior designer. I have some concerns about your current office setup." Concerns about his office setup. Min-jun almost laughed. When was the last time anyone had dared voice concerns about his choices? But there was something about the way she said it, not with arrogance but with genuine care, that made him gesture for her to continue instead of dismissing her immediately. "This marble," she continued, walking to his conference table and running her palm across its cold surface. "It's beautiful. Imported from Carrara. Probably cost more than most people's cars. But it's freezing, Min-jun. May I call you Min-jun?" She didn't wait for an answer. A workspace should inspire collaboration, creativity, trust. This feels like an interrogation room. Something shifted in his chest, watching her move through his space with such natural confidence. She wore simple clothes: beige blazer, white blouse, caramel pants. But everything about her seemed to glow with warmth in contrast to the sterile perfection of his office. "What would you suggest?" he heard himself asking, genuinely curious for the first time in months about something that wasn't a profit margin or market projection. Elena's face lit up. Wood, rich, warm wood for the conference table. And plants, actual living plants, not those artificial monstrosities in the corner. Natural light wherever possible. Colors that make people want to stay and create, not escape as quickly as possible. She pulled out her tablet, showing him mood boards and design concepts, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. Italian hands, he thought. So different from the careful, controlled gestures he was used to in Korean business culture. "You want to make my office homey?" The word felt foreign in his mouth. "I want to make your office human," she corrected. "You spend more time here than anywhere else, don't you? This should be a space that energizes you, not just impresses clients." The observation hit closer to home than she could have known. Min-jun did spend more time here than anywhere else, sometimes sleeping on the leather sofa when deals required his attention across time zones, eating takeout at his desk while reviewing contracts, watching Seoul's seasons change through windows that might as well have been paintings for all the connection he felt to the world outside. "When do you start?" he asked, surprising himself. "Tomorrow, if that works for you. But I'll need your input throughout the process. This isn't about me imposing my vision. It's about creating a space that reflects who you really are, who he really was." As if she could see past the net worth and family name to something underneath. As if there was something underneath worth seeing. "Fine," he said, but the word came out gentler than he intended. "We'll try it your way." Elena's smile could have powered the building. "Perfect. Oh, and Min-jun, you might want to invest in a good coffee machine. That instant stuff you've been drinking is an insult to coffee beans everywhere." She was already at the door when she turned back, catching him staring after her with what must have been obvious confusion on his face. "Don't worry," she said with a wink. "I'm not after your money. I'm after your terrible taste in office beverages." Louder, and then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of jasmine and the unsettling feeling that his perfectly controlled world had just been turned completely upside down. Park Soo-jin had been Min-jun's executive secretary for 8 years, which meant she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read her boss's moods from the smallest details. The way he adjusted his tie meant he was nervous about a presentation. The rhythm of his pen tapping indicated his stress level during conference calls. The precise angle of his shoulders revealed whether he was genuinely angry or just performing anger for strategic purposes. So when Min-jun arrived at the office the morning after meeting Elena Rossi and actually hummed, while reviewing overnight emails, Soo-jin knew something significant had shifted in the cosmic order. "Good morning, Mr. Choi," she said carefully, setting his usual Americano on the desk while studying his face for clues. "Soo-jin," he replied, looking up from his computer screen with what appeared to be genuine good humor. "What do you know about coffee machines?" If Min-jun had announced he was joining the circus, Soo-jin would have been less surprised. In 8 years, he had never once asked about coffee beyond confirming his standing order from the cafe downstairs. "Coffee machines, sir?" "Espresso machines, specifically. Italian ones." Ah. Now the picture became clearer. Soo-jin had been the one to coordinate with the interior design firm, had seen Elena Rossi's portfolio and noted her credentials from Milan's most prestigious design schools. She had also noticed the way Min-jun's voice had changed slightly when confirming the appointment. A subtle warmth that hadn't been there for previous design consultations. "I can research some options for you," she offered diplomatically. "And flowers," Min-jun continued, apparently unaware of how unprecedented this conversation was. "What kind of flowers do Italian women like?" Soo-jin nearly dropped her tablet. In 8 years of managing his schedule, she had never once been asked to arrange flowers for anyone except his mother on her birthday, and obligatory sympathy arrangements for business associates. The few women Min-jun had dated, mostly daughters of other chaebol families, relationships that were more like corporate mergers than romances, had received expensive jewelry or designer handbags, items selected by personal shoppers who understood that showing interest was different from showing thought. "Perhaps," she ventured carefully, "you could ask Ms. Rossi directly what she prefers? During your design consultations?" Min-jun's expression shifted slightly, a barely perceptible softening around his eyes that Soo-jin recognized as the closest thing to vulnerability he ever allowed himself to show. "She's different from the others." It wasn't a question, but Soo-jin understood she was being asked for her opinion. After 8 years of watching her boss maintain perfect emotional distance from everyone in his professional and personal life, she had learned to recognize the rare moments when he sought genuine counsel rather than simple task execution. "She looked at your office and saw potential for improvement rather than opportunity for profit," Soo-jin observed quietly. "That is unusual in our experience." Min-jun nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he had been thinking, but not yet ready to articulate. "She wants to make it human." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond interior design. Soo-jin had worked for Min-jun long enough to understand that his office wasn't just his workspace. It was his fortress, designed to intimidate and maintain distance. The idea that someone wanted to transform it into something warm and welcoming represented a fundamental challenge to everything he had built his life around. "Sir," she said gently, "if I may offer some advice." He gestured for her to continue, which was itself remarkable. Min-jun rarely asked for personal advice, and even more rarely was willing to receive it. Trust is not something that can be purchased or negotiated. It can only be earned through consistency over time. If Ms. Rossi proves herself trustworthy in small things, design choices, meeting schedules, professional conduct, perhaps she might be worthy of trust in larger matters as well. Min-jun was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Seoul skyline, where construction cranes moved like mechanical herons against the morning sky. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note Soo-jin had never heard before. Hope, carefully guarded, but unmistakably present. "Order the espresso machine," he said. "Something good, something that would make an Italian woman smile." As she made notes on her tablet, Sujin allowed herself a small, private smile. After 8 years of watching Minjun build higher and higher walls around his heart, it seemed someone had finally arrived with blueprints for windows. Elena arrived the next morning carrying a small paper bag that filled Minjun's office with the rich aroma of authentic Italian espresso. She found him standing by the windows, still in his perfectly pressed charcoal suit, but somehow looking less intimidating than he had the day before. "I brought coffee," she announced, unpacking 2 small cups from the bag. "Real coffee, from a little place in Itaewon run by a family from Naples. I figured we should start the transformation of your office with something drinkable." Minjun accepted the cup, inhaling the deep, complex scent that made his usual Americano seem like colored water by comparison. When he tasted it, his eyes actually closed for a moment, an unconscious expression of pleasure that made Elena's chest flutter unexpectedly. "This is..." He paused, searching for words that didn't sound like a business report. "Coffee," Elena supplied with a grin. "The way it's supposed to taste." "It's perfect," he admitted, and the simple honesty in his voice made her study his face more carefully. Without the harsh office lighting casting shadows, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension he carried in his shoulders even during a moment of simple pleasure. "When's the last time you took a real break?" she asked, settling into one of his uncomfortable client chairs with her own cup. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I don't really... Breaks aren't... productive?" Elena guessed. "Profitable? Good for the bottom line?" A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Something like that." "Well, this is officially a break," she declared, curling her legs under her in a way that would have horrified his usual business associates with its casual intimacy. "We're drinking coffee, talking about things that aren't work, and you're going to tell me something about yourself that doesn't appear on Forbes lists." "I don't think I know how to do that," Minjun said, but he sat down across from her, his formal posture relaxing slightly. "Start simple. What did you want to be when you were little? Before you knew you'd be running an empire?" He was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a distant quality, as if he was reaching back through layers of corporate responsibility to find something he had buried long ago. "A pilot," he said. "I wanted to fly planes. Commercial or military?" "Neither. Small planes. Private flights to places that didn't have airports. Just landing strips carved out of mountains or beaches. I wanted to take people to places they'd never dreamed of seeing." Elena felt her heart do something complicated and dangerous. Here was Choi Min-jun, heir to billions, admitting he had once dreamed of something as simple as freedom and adventure. "What changed?" she asked gently. His expression closed slightly, the shutters coming down behind his eyes. Reality. Responsibility. The understanding that dreams are luxuries that people like me can't afford. People like you? People who inherit other people's livelihoods along with their trust funds. The bitterness in his voice made Elena set down her coffee cup and really look at him. She was beginning to understand that Minjun's fortune wasn't just his privilege. It was also his prison. "You know," she said carefully, "in Italy, we have this saying, La vita è bella quando si condivide. Life is beautiful when it's shared. Maybe the problem isn't that you have too much responsibility. Maybe it's that you're carrying it all alone." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, hope, fear all tangled together. And who would I share it with? Everyone who gets close to me wants something. Business partnerships, social connections, access to opportunities. Even my so-called friends from university, they all have agendas now. "Not everyone," Elena said quietly. Their eyes met across the small space between their chairs, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with interior design and everything to do with the recognition of kindred spirits. Two people who had built walls around their hearts for different reasons, sitting in a sterile office that suddenly felt more intimate than any bedroom. Min-jun's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. As he glanced at the screen, his expression shifted back to business mode, the brief vulnerability disappearing behind practiced professionalism. "I have a board meeting," he said, standing and straightening his tie with movements that had become unconscious habit. "Of course you do," Elena replied, but her tone was gentle rather than sarcastic. "Thank you for the break, Min-jun, and for telling me about the flying." He paused at his desk, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Elena?" "Yes?" "That espresso machine Su-jin ordered. Maybe you could show me how to use it properly, when it arrives." It was such a small request, but Elena understood it for what it really was. An invitation. The first crack in the fortress walls, barely wide enough for sunlight to slip through, but it was a beginning. "I'd love to," she said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a very long time. 2 weeks into the office renovation, Min-jun found himself looking forward to Elena's daily visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified him. She arrived each morning at precisely 9:30 with coffee for both of them. Never the same blend twice, always something new to challenge his palate, and updates on the transformation of his workspace. The changes were subtle, but profound. The harsh marble conference table had been replaced with rich walnut wood that invited touch rather than commanding distance. Plants now filled the corners and windowsills, their green presence softening the angular lines of modern architecture. The lighting had been adjusted to something warmer, more human, making even his most intimidating business suits look approachable. But the most significant change wasn't in the office. It was in Min-jun himself. "What do you think of this?" Elena asked, holding up fabric samples for the seating area she had insisted on creating. "I was thinking we could add some color to break up all this corporate gray and black." Min-jun studied the swatches. Deep blues, warm golds, soft greens that reminded him of spring mornings he never had time to notice. Colors that felt like possibilities instead of statements. "They're very..." He paused, realizing he was about to say unprofessional, and catching himself. Elena had been gently challenging his assumptions about professionalism for weeks now, showing him that warmth and competence weren't mutually exclusive. "They're beautiful," Elena beamed, and the simple pleasure on her face made something tight in his chest loosen. "I thought you might like the blue. It matches your tie from yesterday." The fact that she had noticed what tie he wore yesterday, had remembered it, and incorporated it into her design choices, hit him with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had paid that kind of attention to him as a person, rather than a position? "You notice things," he said. Not quite a question, but not quite a statement either. "Part of the job," she replied. But there was something in her tone that suggested it might be more than professional observation. "Besides, you're not as intimidating as you think you are." Most people would disagree with that assessment. Elena set down the fabric samples and looked at him directly, those hazel green eyes serious now. "Most people only see the CEO. I see the man who wanted to fly people to impossible places." The reference to their conversation from the previous week made his breath catch. She had remembered, had filed away that small piece of vulnerability he had shared, and was offering it back to him like a gift, rather than wielding it as a weapon. "Elena," he began, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. How to tell her that their morning coffee sessions had become the brightest part of his days. How to explain that her presence in his office had made him realize how lonely he had been, without admitting that loneliness to himself? His phone rang before he could find the words. Sujin's efficient voice announcing that the quarterly stakeholder meeting was about to begin. Elena nodded understanding, already beginning to pack up her design materials with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to working around busy schedules. "Go," she said, but as he reached the door, she called after him. "Min-jun, that blue fabric, it doesn't just match your tie, it matches your eyes when you smile." The comment followed him into the boardroom, where 37 executives were waiting to hear his analysis of third-quarter performance metrics. But for the first time in his professional career, Min-jun found himself distracted during a presentation, not by the numbers on the screen or the implications for market position, but by the memory of Elena's voice saying his eyes were beautiful when he smiled. He realized with a start that he had been smiling more lately. Not the practiced, camera-ready smile he deployed for shareholders and media appearances, but genuine expressions of contentment that happened without conscious decision. Elena was changing more than his office. She was changing him. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, as he watched quarterly profit reports scroll across the projection screen, Min-jun found himself wondering if change might actually be the most valuable investment he had ever made. After the meeting, he returned to his office to find a small gift box on his desk, wrapped in paper the exact shade of blue Elena had shown him earlier. Inside was a coffee cup, handmade ceramic in warm earth tones, clearly Italian in design, with a note in Elena's distinctive handwriting. "For the man who deserves coffee as extraordinary as his dreams." Min-jun held the cup in his hands, feeling its warmth and weight, understanding that this simple gift represented something precious and dangerous. The possibility that someone might care about him without wanting anything in return, except the chance to make his life a little more beautiful. For the first time in 20 years, Choi Min-jun allowed himself to hope. The October rain arrived without warning, transforming Seoul's autumn afternoon into a gray watercolor painting viewed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Min-jun's office. Elena had been working late again, meticulously arranging the final details of his redesigned space, when the storm swept across the city with typical Korean intensity. Min-jun found her standing by the windows at 8:30 p.m., still in her beige blazer, but with her hair slightly mussed from a day of climbing ladders and adjusting light fixtures. She held her phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapid Italian in increasingly frustrated tones. "Sì, capisco, ma... No, Marco, I told you. Ascolta, non è il momento giusto." Even without understanding the language, Min-jun could hear the tension in her voice. When she finally ended the call and noticed him watching, her expression shifted to something between embarrassment and exhaustion. "Sorry," she said, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. "Personal call. I didn't realize you were still here." "It's your office too now," Min-jun replied, surprised by how naturally the words came. "Everything okay?" Elena hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. The intimacy they had built over weeks of morning coffee and design discussions hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. "My ex-boyfriend," she admitted finally. "Marco. He's been calling more frequently lately, wanting to discuss our future. A future I'm not sure exists anymore." Something cold and sharp twisted in Min-jun's chest at the mention of another man having a claim on Elena's thoughts and time. He had no right to feel possessive, no grounds for jealousy, but the emotions arrived anyway, unwelcome and undeniable. "You were together for a long time?" he asked, aiming for casual interest, but hearing his own voice come out more strained than intended. 5 years. We met in university, dated through my early career. talked about marriage and children, and a design firm in Milan with both our names on the letterhead. Elena's smile held no warmth, only wistfulness for dreams that no longer fit. But Marco fell in love with the idea of me, not the reality. He wanted a partner who would complement his ambitions, not compete with them. So you came to Seoul. So I came to Seoul, she confirmed, to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own merit, not as someone's beautiful accessory. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. In the distance, lightning illuminated the Han River like a photographer's flash, turning the familiar cityscape into something dramatic and unfamiliar. "Are you planning to go back?" Min-jun asked, hating how much her answer mattered to him. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying his reflection in the rain-streaked glass rather than looking at him directly. Marco thinks he's changed. He's offering partnership in his firm, creative control over international projects. Everything I thought I wanted when I was 23. But I'm not 23 anymore, she said softly. I've learned that the most beautiful spaces aren't created by compromise. They're created by people who understand each other's visions and choose to build something entirely new together. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that had nothing to do with architecture and everything to do with the careful intimacy they had been building cup of coffee at a time, conversation by vulnerable conversation. Min-jun moved closer, close enough to see the reflection of city lights in her eyes, close enough to catch the familiar scent of jasmine that had become synonymous with warmth and possibility. "Elena," he began, then stopped, terrified by the magnitude of what he wanted to say. That she had transformed more than his office. She had transformed his understanding of what life could be. That morning coffee with her had become more precious than quarterly profit reports. That the thought of her leaving Seoul, leaving him, felt like losing something he hadn't even known he was missing, until she showed up with fabric samples and impossible optimism. "I know," she whispered, and he realized she understood what he couldn't yet say. "I know, Min-jun. I feel it too." The admission shimmered in the space between them, fragile and powerful, and absolutely terrifying. They stood facing each other in the warm light of his redesigned office, surrounded by the evidence of what they could create together. Beauty, warmth, a space that felt like home, while rain continued its percussion against the windows. Min-jun reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with fingers that trembled slightly despite his best efforts at control. Elena's eyes fluttered closed at the contact, and he realized this was the first truly spontaneous gesture he had made in 20 years. "What are we doing?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the storm. "I don't know," Elena replied honestly, "but I don't want to stop." The kiss, when it finally happened, was inevitable as sunrise. Soft at first, hesitant, then deeper as they both surrendered to feelings that had been building since that first cup of shared espresso. Elena tasted like possibility and courage, like everything Min-jun had been afraid to want. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, the rain had softened to a gentle whisper against the glass. Seoul sparkled beyond the windows, familiar yet transformed, like everything else in Min-jun's carefully controlled world. "Marco's coming to Seoul next week," Elena said quietly, her forehead still touching his. "He wants to discuss our future in person." Min-jun's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "And what will you tell him?" Elena's smile was small but certain. That some futures are worth more than security. That some risks are worth taking. That I've found something in Seoul I didn't even know I was looking for. Outside, the storm continued to wash the city clean. And inside, Two people who had built their lives around careful distance finally allowed themselves to hope for something beautiful and dangerous and real. Choi Jae-hyun arrived at his son's office unannounced on a gray Thursday morning, his presence filling the redesigned space like storm clouds gathering before rain. At 58, he commanded attention through sheer force of will and the kind of austere authority that had built Choi Industries from a single textile factory into a multinational conglomerate. Min-jun looked up from his desk to find his father studying the transformed office with the calculating gaze of someone assessing both assets and liabilities. The warm wood conference table, the living plants, the soft lighting that Elena had insisted would improve productivity, all of it clearly fell short of Jae-hyun's expectations for corporate intimidation. "Father?" Min-jun stood, automatically straightening his tie in a gesture that had become unconscious habit during 32 years of seeking approval he never quite received. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," Jae-hyun replied, his voice carrying the crisp disapproval that Min-jun remembered from childhood scoldings. "I've been hearing interesting reports about changes in your office and your priorities." The pause before priorities landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension through the room. Min-jun knew his father well enough to recognize that this visit had been planned, that intelligence had been gathered, that consequences had already been calculated before the conversation even began. The renovation was necessary for improved functionality, Min-jun said carefully, falling back on corporate language that felt safe and distant. Employee satisfaction surveys indicated that workspace environment directly impacts productivity metrics. "Employee satisfaction," Jae-hyun repeated, settling into one of Elena's carefully chosen chairs with the air of someone preparing for interrogation. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Before Min-jun could respond, the office door opened, and Elena entered, carrying her usual morning coffee service, her warm smile freezing when she noticed the additional occupant. She wore a soft cream blazer today, paired with caramel-colored pants that somehow made the corporate environment feel more human, but Min-jun watched her instinctively shift into more formal posture under his father's scrutiny. "Mr. Choi," she said with polite professionalism, offering a slight bow that managed to be respectful without being subservient. "I'm Elena Rossi, the interior designer. I can come back later if this is a private meeting." "No need," Jae-hyun replied, his tone carrying the kind of false courtesy that Min-jun recognized as preparation for attack. "I was hoping to meet the woman who has so thoroughly redesigned my son's workspace, and apparently his judgment." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly, but her composure remained intact as she set down the coffee cups and gathered her design materials with efficient movements. "The renovation was completed according to Mr. Choi's specifications for improved functionality and employee well-being," she said calmly. "All changes were approved through proper channels and stayed within the allocated budget parameters." "I'm sure they were." Jae-hyun smiled with all the warmth of winter steel. "Tell me, Ms. Rossi, in your professional opinion, what makes an office space truly effective?" It was a trap, and all three of them knew it. Any answer Elena gave would be used as ammunition in whatever larger battle Jae-hyun was preparing to wage against his son's choices. "Trust," Elena said simply, surprising both men with the directness of her response. An effective office space reflects the values and vision of the person who works in it. It should inspire confidence in employees and clients while providing a foundation for authentic leadership. "Authentic leadership," Jae-hyun mused. "And in your culture, Ms. Rossi, do personal relationships often interfere with authentic leadership?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Min-jun felt his chest tighten with the familiar combination of anger and helplessness that his father had always been able to provoke. This was the same pattern that had played out throughout his life. Jae-hyun identifying anything that brought Min-jun happiness or comfort, and systematically dismantling it under the guise of practical necessity. "In my culture," Elena replied with quiet dignity, "we believe that a leader who understands human connection is more effective than one who rules through isolation." "How philosophical," Jae-hyun's smile sharpened. "I suppose that perspective serves you well in temporary consulting positions. Less so in permanent leadership roles, where personal feelings must be subordinated to fiduciary responsibility." Min-jun watched Elena absorb the blow. The subtle reminder that her position was temporary, that she was an outsider, that whatever was developing between them was ultimately irrelevant to the larger machinery of corporate governance. Her face remained professionally composed, but he could see the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated his father's words had found their mark. "Father," Min-jun said, his voice carrying warning. "I'm simply stating facts," Jae-hyun replied with feigned innocence. "Ms. Rossi's contract with our company concludes next month. I assume she has plans to return to Italy, to her real life and her real career opportunities." The silence stretched between them, thick with implications and unspoken challenges. Elena looked between father and son, clearly understanding that she had become a pawn in a much larger game of power and control that had been playing out for decades. "If you'll excuse me," she said finally, "I have other appointments this morning. Mr. Choi, the final installation will be completed by Friday as scheduled." She left without looking back, her departure leaving behind only the faint scent of jasmine and the heavy weight of everything that had gone unsaid. Jae-hyun waited until the elevator doors closed, before turning to his son with an expression of paternal disappointment that Min-jun had learned to dread. "She's lovely," he said conversationally. "Intelligent, talented, obviously devoted to her work. Exactly the kind of woman who deserves a life uncomplicated by the demands of our family business." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we care about is let them go before we destroy them." The words hit Min-jun like physical blows, not because they were cruel, but because they carried the terrible weight of potential truth. He had seen what happened to people who got too close to the Choi family fortune. The constant security concerns, the public scrutiny, the way money and power attracted parasites and predators who would use any weakness against them. "She's not like the others," Min-jun said quietly. "No," Jae-hyun agreed. "She's better. Which is precisely why she deserves better than what we can offer her." As his father left, Min-jun stood alone in his beautiful, redesigned office, surrounded by Elena's warmth and vision, and wondered if loving someone meant being strong enough to let them go before his world destroyed everything pure and genuine about them. Outside the windows, Seoul continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in glass towers and corporate boardrooms, where love and duty waged their eternal war for the hearts of men who had inherited more money than they had ever wanted. If Elena and Min-jun's story is already making your heart race, consider subscribing to never miss our emotional Korean dramas that explore love beyond boundaries. Marco Benedetti arrived in Seoul on a Tuesday afternoon flight from Milan, bringing with him the scent of Italian leather and the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He stood in the arrivals terminal of Incheon International Airport, scanning the crowd with warm brown eyes that held none of the guardedness Min-jun had learned to associate with anyone entering his orbit. Elena met him at the coffee shop in the Four Seasons, her choice of a public, neutral location speaking volumes about her state of mind. She had changed from her usual work attire into casual clothes: dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, leather boots that whispered against the marble floor as she walked toward the man who had once planned to share her entire future. Min-jun knew about the meeting because Elena had told him. her honesty both a gift and a torture. He sat in his redesigned office, trying to focus on quarterly projections while imagining Elena's face lighting up at familiar jokes, her hands moving in animated Italian gestures as she caught up with someone who had known her before Seoul, before Choi Industries, before everything became complicated by fortune and family expectations. Marco looked exactly like Minjun had expected and feared. Handsome in an effortless European way, with dark hair that caught the afternoon light and the kind of easy charm that made strangers feel like old friends. He wore his clothes with casual elegance, expensive without being ostentatious, confident without needing to prove anything to anyone. "Elena," Marco's voice carried genuine warmth as he stood to embrace her, and Minjun knew from Elena's stories that this was how he had always greeted her, with full attention and uncomplicated affection. "You look incredible. Seoul agrees with you." "Marco," Elena replied, accepting his embrace but stepping back quickly, maintaining distance that spoke of changed feelings and careful boundaries. "How was your flight?" They settled into armchairs overlooking the Seoul skyline, the city sprawling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows in a display of modern Korean ambition and ancient cultural foundation. Marco ordered espresso. Of course he did, Minjun thought bitterly, while Elena chose tea, as if caffeine might make her too nervous for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "I've missed you," Marco said without preamble, his directness one of the qualities that had first attracted Elena years ago in Milan. "The apartment feels empty without your design projects taking over the dining room table. The office feels different without your ideas challenging mine." Elena studied his face, searching for signs of the changes he had promised in their phone conversations. "Marco, why are you here? Really here, in Seoul? Not just calling or texting?" "Because I realized something after you left," he replied, leaning forward with the intensity Elena remembered from their university days when he was passionate about a new architectural concept. "I was so focused on building our professional partnership that I forgot we were supposed to be building a life together. I took you for granted, treated your ambitions like hobbies instead of recognizing your talent." The admission hung between them, sincere and painful, and exactly what Elena might have needed to hear 6 months earlier. But now, after weeks of morning coffee with Minjun, after seeing her design vision transform not just his office, but something fundamental in his approach to life, Marco's words felt like they were arriving for someone she used to be. "I've changed too," Elena said carefully. "Seoul has taught me things about myself I didn't know. About what I need in a partner, what I can accomplish when someone truly believes in my vision." "The Korean businessman," Marco said, and despite his efforts to keep judgment out of his voice, Elena caught the subtle note of dismissal. "Elena, you know I respect your professional achievements, but are you sure this isn't just exotic appeal? The excitement of a foreign culture? The flattery of being the Western woman who caught the attention of some wealthy Asian CEO?" The words hit their target with precision born of intimate knowledge. Marco knew Elena well enough to identify her insecurities, to voice the doubts that kept her awake at night, wondering if Minjun's interest was genuine, or simply the novelty of someone who didn't automatically defer to his wealth and position. "It's not like that," Elena said, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Come back to Milan," Marco continued, pressing his advantage. "I've already spoken with the partners about bringing you in as co-director of international projects. You'd have your own team, your own clients, complete creative control over the European accounts you've always wanted to manage." He pulled out his phone, showing her architectural renderings and business projections, the concrete evidence of opportunities waiting for her back home. Everything looked beautiful and successful, and exactly like the dreams she had harbored before Soul taught her to dream bigger. "We could start over," Marco said softly. "Not as the people we were at 23, but as the people we've become. I understand now that your career isn't secondary to mine. It's equally important. We could build something incredible together, Elena. Something stable and lasting and ours." Elena looked out at the Seoul skyline, at the city that had challenged her professionally and personally, that had introduced her to morning coffee, with a man whose vulnerability was hidden behind billion-dollar decisions, and whose smile could make her forget why falling in love with him was dangerous. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," Marco replied, but his confidence suggested he already knew what her answer would be. "Take all the time you need. I'm here for the week, staying at the Lotta. When you're ready to come home, Elena, I'll be waiting." He left her sitting in the coffee shop, surrounded by the familiar sounds of Seoul traffic and the distant hum of construction that never seemed to stop in this city of constant transformation. Elena stared at the business proposals on her phone screen, at the evidence of everything safe and known and professionally fulfilling that was waiting for her back in Italy. Then she thought about Min-jun finding her working late in his office, bringing her takeout from his favorite Korean restaurant, and staying to share dinner while they debated the psychological impact of lighting choices on productivity. She thought about the way he listened to her ideas with genuine respect, the way he had trusted her with small vulnerabilities that no one else ever saw, the way he was learning to believe that someone might love him for the man he was behind the fortune. Elena closed her eyes and tried to imagine returning to Milan, to a life that would be comfortable and successful, and completely devoid of the electric possibility she felt every time Min-jun walked into a room. The choice shouldn't have been difficult. Logic dictated that she should choose security over risk, professional partnership over emotional uncertainty, the known over the unknowable. But as Elena sat in the Four Seasons coffee shop watching Seoul's skyline shift in the afternoon light, she realized that the most important decisions of her life had never been logical at all. The awkward collision happened entirely by accident, or perhaps by the kind of cosmic inevitability that Seoul seemed to specialize in. Elena had suggested a small Italian restaurant in Itaewon for her second dinner with Marco, somewhere intimate enough for serious conversation, but public enough to maintain emotional distance. Min-jun had chosen the same restaurant for a business dinner with potential Japanese investors, drawn by Sujin's research indicating it served authentic cuisine that might impress clients accustomed to international dining standards. The moment Elena spotted Min-jun across the dining room, elegant in his dark navy suit and engaged in what appeared to be intense negotiation over wine selection, her heart performed a complicated rhythm that felt like panic and longing combined. Marco, following her gaze, took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone trained to read architectural spaces and the power dynamics they revealed. "That's him, isn't it?" Marco asked quietly. "Your Korean CEO." Before Elena could respond, Min-jun looked up from his business discussion, and their eyes met across the restaurant. The recognition hit him like a physical force. Elena, in a soft green dress he had never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the professional style she wore to the office. And beside her, a man whose easy confidence and intimate familiarity with her body language told the entire story without need for introduction. Min-jun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign of emotion he allowed himself in front of the Japanese investors who were watching this unexpected interaction with the keen attention of people paid to notice weakness in negotiation partners. "Excuse me," Min-jun said to his dinner companions with practiced courtesy. "I should greet a colleague." He approached their table with the controlled grace Elena had learned to associate with his most dangerous moods, perfectly polite on the surface, predatory underneath. Marco rose to meet him, extending his hand with the kind of European directness that Min-jun recognized as both challenge and test. "You must be Min-jun," Marco said in accented but confident English. "Elena has told me so much about you. I'm Marco Benedetti, her former partner." The word former carried enough ambiguity to serve multiple purposes, and Min-jun caught the calculated nature of the introduction. This man had experience in high-stakes negotiations, understood how to establish position through careful word choice. "Mr. Benedetti," Min-jun replied, his handshake precisely calibrated to convey strength without aggression. "I hope you're enjoying Seoul. Elena speaks of Milan with great fondness." "It's a beautiful city," Marco agreed. "Full of opportunities for the right person. I'm hoping to convince Elena that her future still lies there." The gauntlet thrown, the battle lines drawn, both men standing beside Elena's chair, while she watched this masculine display of territorial marking with growing irritation. "Gentlemen," Elena interjected, her voice carrying the kind of sharp authority that made both men refocus on her face. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my future." "Of course," Min-jun said, but his eyes never left Marco's face. "Elena is extraordinarily talented. Any city would be fortunate to benefit from her vision." "Exactly my point," Marco replied smoothly. "Milan has been waiting for her return. We have projects lined up that would showcase her abilities on an international scale, partnerships that could define her career for decades." Min-jun felt the words like ice water in his veins. Here was Marco offering Elena everything practical and professional, everything that made sense for her long-term success, while Min-jun could offer only the uncertain emotional complexity of loving someone whose family fortune made every relationship a potential liability. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity," Min-jun said, and Elena caught the subtle note of defeat in his voice that Marco missed entirely. Elena deserves to have her talents recognized at the highest levels. "I should return to my business dinner," Min-jun continued, stepping back with movements that looked like courtesy, but felt like retreat. "Enjoy your evening." He was already turning away when Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the restaurant floor with a sound that made nearby diners look up from their conversations. "This is ridiculous," she announced to both men, her hazel green eyes flashing with anger that had been building throughout this absurd display. "You're both talking about me like I'm not here, like I'm some prize to be won through superior career positioning or romantic gestures." She grabbed her purse from the table, her movements sharp with frustrated energy. "Marco, I told you I needed time to think. Min-jun, I expected better from you than this territorial nonsense." Elena walked toward the restaurant exit without looking back, leaving both men standing by the abandoned table with its half-finished wine and completely derailed dinner plans. Marco was the first to recover, settling back into his chair with the rueful expression of someone who recognized a tactical error. She always did have a temper when she felt cornered. Min-jun remained standing, watching Elena's retreating figure until she disappeared into Seoul's neon-lit evening. "She's not a business acquisition to be negotiated over." "No," Marco agreed, surprising Min-jun with his honesty. "She's not. But she is a woman who deserves stability and partnership, not emotional uncertainty with someone whose lifestyle could never accommodate the kind of genuine relationship she needs." The words hit their mark because they contained enough truth to sting. Min-jun understood the complications his wealth and family expectations would bring to any serious relationship. He had seen what happened to people who got too close to the Choi family orbit, the security concerns, the media attention, the way money attracted predators who would use any weakness as leverage. "You may be right," Min-jun said quietly. "I usually am," Marco replied without arrogance. just the confidence of someone stating observable fact. The question is whether you care about Elena enough to want what's truly best for her, even if that's not you. Min-jun returned to his business dinner, where the Japanese investors politely ignored the personal drama that had just played out beside their table. He managed to complete the negotiation successfully, securing a partnership that would benefit thousands of employees and generate millions in revenue. But as he signed the contracts later that evening in his redesigned office, surrounded by Elena's vision of warmth and possibility, Min-jun couldn't escape the feeling that he was about to lose something far more valuable than any business deal could ever replace. Outside his windows, Seoul glittered in the darkness. 10 million people pursuing their dreams in a city that promised transformation for those brave enough to risk everything for love. The question was whether Min-jun had that kind of courage, or whether he would let fear win again, as it had for 32 years of careful, solitary existence. Elena walked through Seoul's neon-lit streets for hours after leaving the restaurant, her heels clicking against pavement still wet from afternoon rain. The city pulsed around her with its familiar energy, delivery scooters weaving through traffic, late-night food stalls filling the air with the scent of grilled meat and fermented vegetables, young couples sharing umbrellas and intimate conversations under the glow of Korean characters she was still learning to read. She found herself outside Choi Tower at nearly midnight, looking up at the illuminated floors where Min-jun might still be working, where the office she had redesigned waited in darkness like a love letter written in furniture and lighting choices. Her phone buzzed with messages. Marco asking if she was okay, apologizing for the territorial display at dinner, promising they could discuss their future without pressure. Each text carried the weight of familiar affection and professional opportunity, everything logical and safe about returning to Milan. But Elena found herself thinking about morning coffee with Min-jun, about the way his eyes softened when he talked about dreams he'd buried under family expectations, about how he had trusted her enough to let her transform his fortress into something human. She thought about the careful distance he maintained with everyone else, and the small ways he had learned to let her closer, sharing takeout dinners when they worked late, asking her opinion on decisions that had nothing to do with interior design, the way he said her name, like it was something precious. The security guard recognized her from months of daily visits and buzzed her into the building without question. The elevator carried her to the 47th floor in silence, and she found Min-jun exactly where she expected, at his desk, surrounded by contracts and quarterly reports, a half-empty cup of coffee gone cold beside his laptop. He looked up when she entered, and something vulnerable flashed across his face before his professional mask clicked into place. "Elena," he said quietly, "I thought you were having dinner with Marco." "That didn't go as planned," she replied, settling into the chair across from his desk, where she had spent so many mornings sharing espresso and gradually peeling away layers of his carefully constructed defenses. "We need to talk, Min-jun. Really talk, without territorial displays or career calculations or anyone else's expectations about what we should want." Min-jun leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the soft lighting she had chosen specifically because it revealed truth rather than hiding it. "Marco offered you everything practical. Partnership, creative control, a future without complications." "Yes, he did. You should take it." The words came out hollow, like he was reciting lines from a script he didn't believe in. "You deserve someone who can offer you normalcy, Elena. Someone whose love doesn't come with security details and board meetings and family expectations that could destroy everything good about you." Elena stood and walked to the windows, looking out at Seoul's skyline where millions of lights twinkled like earthbound stars. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of quiet certainty that comes from finally understanding what you're willing to fight for. "Do you know what I realized tonight, watching you and Marco perform that ridiculous alpha male routine? You were both so busy deciding what was best for me that neither of you bothered to ask what I actually want." She turned to face him, and Min-jun saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten with dangerous hope. "I want morning coffee with someone who remembers how I take my espresso and asks about my dreams like they matter. I want to work with someone who trusts my vision enough to let me transform their most guarded spaces. I want to love someone brave enough to let me see their vulnerabilities and strong enough to see mine." Elena moved closer to his desk, her hazel green eyes holding his with unwavering intensity. "Marco can offer me Milan and professional partnership and everything safe and familiar. But you, Min-jun, you can offer me something I never knew I was looking for." "What's that?" "The chance to build something entirely new together. Not a merger of existing lives, but the creation of something that's never existed before. Something that's ours." Min-jun stood slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever was happening between them. "Elena, my world is complicated. My father will never approve. The media attention alone could destroy your career. Every relationship I've ever had has been poisoned by questions about money and motivation." "Then maybe," Elena said, stepping around his desk until she was close enough to touch his face, to feel his breath catch when her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "It's time to stop letting fear make your decisions for you." The kiss that followed was different from their first tentative exploration weeks earlier. This was a declaration, a choice made with full knowledge of consequences, a bridge burned and a new path chosen simultaneously. Min-jun's hands tangled in her hair, and Elena felt him surrender the last of his careful control. Felt him finally believe that someone might love him not despite his complications, but including them. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Seoul continued its relentless pulse beyond the windows, indifferent to the human drama playing out in corporate towers and glass offices where love and duty waged their eternal war. "Marco leaves for Milan on Friday," Elena whispered against his lips. "Will you be going with him?" Elena's smile held all the warmth that had been missing from their conversation with Marco, all the certainty that came from finally understanding the difference between settling for safe and choosing brave. "I'm exactly where I want to be," she said. "The question is, are you ready to trust that this is real?" Min-jun looked into her eyes, seeing reflected there not the calculating interest he had learned to expect from people who entered his orbit, but something far more dangerous and infinitely more precious. Genuine love offered without conditions or hidden agendas. For the first time in 32 years, Choi Min-jun decided that some risks were worth everything. The confrontation Jae-hyun had been orchestrating arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered with the surgical precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of corporate warfare. He sat across from his son in the redesigned office, surrounded by Elena's vision of warmth and humanity, and delivered his ultimatum with the calm authority of someone accustomed to having his decisions followed without question. "The board is concerned," Jae-hyun began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional power behind personal opinion. "About your recent distractions, your focus on office aesthetics over quarterly performance, your association with temporary consultants who may not understand the long-term implications of their influence." Min-jun recognized the coded language immediately. His father never attacked directly when surgical precision would accomplish the same goal with less resistance. "My performance metrics remain above industry standards," Min-jun replied carefully. "Productivity in my division has actually increased since the office renovation. Employee satisfaction surveys show—" "This isn't about employee satisfaction," Jae-hyun interrupted, his patience wearing thin with corporate deflection. "It's about judgment, about understanding that personal relationships are luxuries that people in our position cannot afford." He pulled out a tablet, sliding it across Elena's carefully chosen conference table, with movements that suggested he had been planning this moment for weeks. The screen displayed photographs, Minjun and Elena sharing coffee in his office, walking together through Choi Tower's lobby, the kiss they had shared by the windows that night when Elena had chosen Seoul over Milan. Private investigators are remarkably thorough these days, Jae-hyun observed with clinical detachment. Every business rival we have now knows about your romantic involvement with Ms. Rossi. Every competitor looking for leverage against our family has been handed a perfect weapon. Minjun stared at the photographs, feeling something cold and familiar settle in his chest. The same helpless rage he had experienced as a child when his father systematically dismantled every friendship, every connection, every source of joy that might have competed with corporate loyalty. You had her followed. I had our family's interests protected, Jae-hyun corrected, which is apparently something you're no longer capable of doing objectively. The office door opened, and Elena entered carrying her usual morning coffee service, her warm smile freezing when she noticed the tension radiating from both men and the photographs displayed on the conference table like evidence in a trial. I should come back later, she said quietly, already beginning to retreat. No, Jae-hyun said with false courtesy. Please join us, Ms. Rossi. This conversation concerns you directly. Elena approached slowly, her eyes taking in the surveillance photographs with growing understanding. When she looked at Minjun, he saw in her expression the same hurt and betrayal he was feeling, the violation of having their private moments weaponized for public consumption. Mr. Choi, Elena said to Jae-hyun, her voice steady despite the circumstances. If you have concerns about my professional conduct or the quality of my work, I'm happy to address them directly. My concerns, Jae-hyun replied, are about the impact your relationship with my son is having on his judgment and our company's vulnerability to external manipulation. He pulled out another set of documents, spreading them across the table with the methodical precision of someone presenting a legal case. Marco Benedetti has been in contact with 3 major European firms that compete directly with our international contracts. Since arriving in Seoul, he has attended social gatherings where he's been photographed with executives from companies currently bidding against us for projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the implications became clear. You think Marco is using me to gain insider information about Choi Industries? I think Mr. Benedetti is an ambitious businessman who understands that emotional leverage is often more effective than financial leverage, Jae-hyun replied. Whether you're aware of his agenda or not is irrelevant to the potential damage. Minjun watched Elena process the information, saw the moment when professional paranoia began to war with personal trust. This was exactly what his father had intended, to plant seeds of doubt that would poison every aspect of their relationship going forward. Even if Marco has ulterior motives, Minjun said, his voice carrying dangerous quiet. That doesn't change anything between Elena and me. Doesn't it? Jae-hyun pulled out his final weapon, a folder thick with legal documents. This is a comprehensive security analysis of every person Ms. Rossi has been in contact with since arriving in Seoul. Her ex-boyfriend's business connections, her professional references, her financial history, her family's political affiliations in Italy. Elena stared at the folder, understanding that her entire life had been dissected and analyzed, like a corporate acquisition. You investigated my family? We investigate everyone who gets close to our family, Jae-hyun said without apology. It's not personal, Ms. Rossi. It's necessary. It's violation, Elena replied, her voice shaking with controlled anger. It's the reduction of human relationships to risk assessment and profit calculation. She looked at Minjun, searching his face for some sign that he was as appalled by his father's methods as she was. But what she saw instead was resignation, the familiar defeat of someone who had fought this battle before and lost. "Did you know?" she asked quietly. "About the investigation?" Minjun's silence was answer enough. Elena set down the coffee cups with movements that spoke of careful control over explosive emotions. "I see. So while I was sharing my dreams and vulnerabilities and falling in love with who I thought you were having my entire life cataloged and analyzed for potential security threats." "Elena, it's exactly like that," she interrupted, backing toward the door with the careful movements of someone trying not to run. "It's exactly the kind of thing that happens when you try to love someone whose fortune makes every relationship a business transaction." She paused at the door, looking back at both men with an expression that held more sadness than anger. "Marco was right about one thing," she said quietly. "I do deserve better than this." After she left, father and son sat in the redesigned office surrounded by evidence of surveillance and manipulation, the morning coffee growing cold in abandoned cups. "It's for the best," Jae-hyun said finally. "She would never have been able to handle the realities of our life long term." Minjun stared at the photographs of himself and Elena, at the documented evidence of the happiest weeks of his adult life reduced to security concerns and corporate liability assessments. "Get out," he said quietly. "Minjun, get out of my office, now." After his father left, Minjun sat alone in the space Elena had transformed, surrounded by warm wood and living plants and everything human she had brought into his sterile world. Through the windows, Seoul continued its endless construction and reconstruction, a city built on the belief that transformation was always possible. But as Minjun stared at the surveillance photographs scattered across his conference table, he wondered if some transformations came too late, and some trust, once broken, could never be rebuilt. Elena's resignation letter arrived by courier the next morning, delivered with the same professional efficiency she had brought to every aspect of her work. Minjun read it twice, the formal language doing nothing to disguise the hurt underneath her corporate politeness. "Dear Mr. Choi," it began, and the return to formal address felt like a door slamming shut on everything they had built together. "Please accept this letter as notification of my immediate resignation from the Choi Industries interior design project. All work has been completed according to contract specifications. Final invoices and project documentation will be forwarded through appropriate channels. No mention of morning coffee or shared vulnerabilities or the night she had chosen Seoul over Milan. Just professional courtesy wrapped around personal devastation." Soo-jin found him an hour later, still holding the letter while staring out at Seoul's skyline, as if the city might offer answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "Sir," she said gently, "your father is on line 1. He'd like to discuss transition plans for the European accounts now that the security concerns have been resolved." Security concerns. As if Elena had been a data breach instead of the woman who had taught him that love didn't have to be a liability. "Tell him I'm unavailable," Minjun said without turning from the windows. "He's quite insistent, sir. He mentioned something about the board meeting this afternoon requiring your full attention, now that distractions have been eliminated." Distractions. The word hit Minjun like physical force, and he realized with sudden clarity that this was the pattern that had defined his entire life. Every source of joy systematically classified as distraction, every connection labeled as weakness, every possibility for authentic human relationship sacrificed on the altar of corporate success. "Soo-jin," he said quietly, "in your professional opinion, what makes a leader truly effective?" The question surprised her. After 8 years of managing his schedule and observing his decision-making process, she had never been asked for her perspective on leadership philosophy. Trust, she said without hesitation. The ability to inspire loyalty through authentic relationship rather than fear or obligation. It was almost exactly what Elena had said about office design, about creating spaces that reflected genuine vision rather than mere intimidation. Minjun realized that Elena had been trying to teach him something far more important than interior decorating. She had been showing him how to be human. "Cancel my meetings for today," he said, turning from the windows with sudden purpose. "All of them." "Sir, the board meeting? Cancel it. Reschedule everything. I have somewhere I need to be." Minjun found Elena in her temporary apartment in Gangnam, the same furnished corporate housing that Choi Industries provided for all international consultants. She opened the door wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that somehow made her more beautiful than any professional styling ever had. "Minjun," she said, surprise and wariness warring in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Choosing," he replied simply. "Finally, after 32 years of letting other people make my decisions for me, I'm choosing." Elena didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. Behind her, he could see suitcases open on the bed, clothes folded with the precision of someone preparing to leave forever. "You're going back to Milan," he observed. "Marco's offer is still open. Partnership in his firm, creative control over international projects, a life where my personal relationships aren't treated like corporate security threats." The words carried no malice, just the exhausted resignation of someone who had finally accepted that some dreams were too expensive to pursue. "Elena," Minjun began, then stopped, realizing he had no prepared speech, no strategic approach to this conversation. For the first time in his adult life, he was operating purely on instinct and desperate hope. "I fired the investigators," he said. "All of them. And I told my father that if he wants me to continue running the company, he needs to understand that my personal life is no longer subject to board approval." Elena's expression shifted slightly, surprise replacing some of the careful distance. "What did he say?" "That I was making a mistake that would cost our family everything. That love is a luxury people like us can't afford. That I'm choosing temporary happiness over permanent responsibility." "And what did you tell him?" Minjun stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her hazel green eyes, close enough to catch the familiar scent of jasmine that had become synonymous with everything good in his life. "I told him that maybe it's time to redefine what responsibility actually means. That maybe taking care of thousands of employees doesn't require sacrificing my own humanity. That maybe the strongest leaders are the ones who understand love doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave enough to be better than you ever thought possible." Elena's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, tears gathering in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain emotional distance. "Minjun, even if you mean that now, your world will never be simple. There will always be security concerns and media attention and people trying to use our relationship against you. Are you really ready for that kind of complicated life?" "I'm ready for whatever complications come with loving you," he replied, reaching out to touch her face with fingers that trembled slightly despite his best efforts at control. "What I'm not ready for is a life where I'm so busy protecting myself from potential pain that I miss out on actual joy." The kiss that followed was desperate and tender, and full of the kind of hope that feels dangerous because it demands courage. Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer as if physical proximity could bridge the gap between the life she had planned and the life she actually wanted. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Minjun rested his forehead against hers and spoke the words he had never said to anyone before. "I love you, Elena Rossi. Not because you transformed my office or challenged my assumptions or fit some corporate image of an appropriate partner, I love you because you see the man I could be, instead of just the man I've been forced to become." Elena's tears came freely now, carrying with them months of careful emotional control and professional distance. "I love you too. But Min-jun, if we do this, if we really choose each other, there's no going back. Your father will never approve. My career will always be complicated by association with your family. Are you sure this is what you want?" Min-jun looked around her apartment, at the suitcases packed for Milan, and the evidence of a life she was prepared to abandon for something safe and predictable. Then he looked back at her face, at the woman who had taught him that the most valuable investments weren't measured in profit margins, but in the capacity for genuine human connection. "Elena," he said with quiet certainty, "you are the best decision I've ever made. Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Min-jun saw reflected there the same courage that had brought her to Seoul in the first place, the same willingness to risk everything for the possibility of something extraordinary. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, yes. Let's figure it out together." The kiss that sealed their decision tasted like possibility and promise, like two people finally brave enough to build something entirely new instead of settling for what they thought they were supposed to want. Outside Elena's apartment windows, Seoul pulsed with its eternal energy of transformation and possibility. A city that understood that the most beautiful things were often built by people willing to risk everything for love. 6 months later, the Choi Industries office had become something unprecedented in Korean corporate culture, a space that breathed humanity while maintaining the sophisticated professionalism required for international business. The warm wood conference table had hosted merger discussions that resulted in partnerships built on mutual respect rather than intimidation. The living plants had witnessed handshake agreements that honored both profit and purpose. The natural lighting had illuminated contracts signed by leaders who understood that trust was the most valuable currency in any transaction. Min-jun stood by the windows, watching Seoul's morning light paint the city in shades of gold and possibility. His suit was the same impeccable charcoal gray, his tie the same navy silk, his watch the same gold Patek Philippe. But something fundamental had shifted in the way he inhabited his own life. The rigid posture had relaxed into confident ease. The guarded expression had opened into something warmer, more genuinely approachable. Elena entered carrying 2 cups of perfectly brewed espresso, her morning ritual unchanged despite the fact that she now had her own office 3 floors down, where she ran the newly established Choi Industries International Design Division. She wore a cream blazer today, paired with caramel pants and the kind of satisfied smile that came from work that challenged her abilities while honoring her vision. "Good morning," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, where their relationship had first taken root over shared coffee and gradual vulnerability. "Good morning," Min-jun replied, accepting his cup with the same careful attention he had brought to their first conversations, but now infused with the comfortable intimacy of 2 people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of consequences. The morning newspaper lay folded on his desk, featuring a front-page article about the success of Choi Industries' new approach to international partnerships. The reporter had interviewed several European clients, who specifically mentioned the company's ability to balance Korean precision with international cultural sensitivity, a diplomatic way of acknowledging Elena's influence on corporate culture. "Your father called this morning," Elena mentioned casually, though they both knew there was nothing casual about ongoing family dynamics. "He wants to discuss the quarterly projections for the European division." Jae-hyun's acceptance of Elena had been gradual and strategic, rather than warm and familial. He had recognized that fighting his son's choice would be counterproductive, especially when that choice was generating measurable increases in international business. His approval remained conditional and carefully measured, but it was approval nonetheless. "What did you tell him?" Min-jun asked. "That his son is perfectly capable of managing his own business relationships, and that if he wants to discuss company matters with me, he should schedule a proper meeting through appropriate channels." Min-jun's smile carried genuine warmth. Elena had learned to navigate his family's complex dynamics with the same skill she brought to design challenges, understanding the underlying structure while refusing to be intimidated by surface intimidation. "You know, he actually respects that kind of directness," Min-jun observed. "I know. It's the only language he speaks fluently." Their morning routine was interrupted by Soo-jin's arrival with the day's schedule and a small gift box wrapped in familiar Italian paper. Elena's expression lit up with recognition. She had ordered something special from a shop in Milan, a surprise she had been planning for weeks. "What's this?" Min-jun asked, accepting the box with the careful attention he always brought to Elena's gifts, understanding that her presents were never random, but always carried meaning worth contemplating. Inside was a vintage compass, brass and elegant, with Italian engraving around the edges. The inscription read, "Per chi ha il coraggio di esplorare nuovi territori," for those who have the courage to explore new territories. Min-jun held the compass in his palm, feeling its weight and warmth, understanding immediately why Elena had chosen this particular gift. It represented everything they had built together: the willingness to navigate uncharted territory, the courage to trust their instincts over conventional wisdom, the partnership that honored both their individual strengths and their shared vision. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "I thought you might like it, since you never did get to be a pilot, but you ended up learning to navigate anyway." The reference to their early conversation about childhood dreams made Min-jun's chest tighten with familiar affection. Elena remembered everything, not just the professional details that mattered for business, but the personal revelations that mattered for love. "Elena," he said, setting down the compass and looking at her with an expression that had become familiar over months of choosing courage over fear. "There's something I want to ask you." She must have heard something in his voice, because her attention sharpened, her coffee cup settling onto the desk with movements that spoke of sudden focus. Min-jun stood and moved to the window, looking out at Seoul's endless construction and transformation, at the city that had brought them together and taught them both that the most beautiful things were often built by people willing to risk everything for love. When he turned back to Elena, she saw in his expression the same vulnerability he had shown her that first night when she found him asleep at his desk, but now combined with a certainty that came from months of proving to himself that some people could be trusted with the most precious parts of yourself. "We've built something incredible together," he said. "Not just this office, not just the business partnerships, but something that belongs entirely to us. Something that's stronger than family expectations or corporate politics or cultural differences." Elena stood slowly, understanding that this moment was significant in ways that went beyond daily routine or professional collaboration. "I've learned that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life," Min-jun continued, moving closer until he could see the gold flecks in her hazel green eyes, until he could catch the familiar scent of jasmine that had become synonymous with home. "It's about finding someone worth building an entirely new life with." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to ask. "Elena Rossi," he said, dropping to one knee in the office she had transformed from fortress into sanctuary. "Will you marry me? Will you help me continue building something that's never existed before? Something that's entirely ours?" The ring was perfect. Not the largest diamond he could have afforded, but a vintage setting with intricate Italian metalwork that honored her heritage while creating something entirely new. It was a ring chosen with the same careful attention he brought to all their shared decisions, understanding that the most meaningful gestures were personal rather than merely expensive. Elena's tears came immediately, carrying with them months of careful professional boundaries finally dissolving into personal truth. She looked at Min-jun, kneeling in his perfectly pressed suit in the office, where they had first learned to trust each other, and realized that this was exactly the future she had never dared to dream about. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with the kind of certainty that had brought her to Seoul in the first place. "Yes, absolutely yes." The kiss that followed tasted like possibility and promise, like two people who had learned that the greatest risk was not in loving someone completely, but in missing the chance to build something extraordinary together. Outside the windows, Seoul sparkled in the morning light. 10 million people pursuing their dreams in a city that understood transformation was always possible for those brave enough to choose love over fear. As Min-jun slipped the ring onto Elena's finger, both of them understood that they weren't just promising to love each other. They were promising to continue building the kind of life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision. The kind of partnership that proved love wasn't a luxury for people like them, but the foundation for everything truly worthwhile they would ever accomplish. The Choi Rossi Foundation officially launched on a spring morning when Seoul's cherry blossoms painted the city in shades of pink possibility. Elena stood on the foundation's headquarters balcony, wearing a soft green dress that caught the morning light, watching as young designers from around the world entered the building below for their orientation program. The foundation had been Min-jun's wedding gift to her, not jewelry or property, but the opportunity to create something that would help international artists find opportunities in foreign markets, just as she had found her place in Seoul. It was the kind of gift that revealed how completely he understood her dreams, how thoroughly he supported her vision for using their resources to build bridges instead of walls. "Second thoughts?" Min-jun asked, joining her on the balcony with 2 cups of perfectly brewed espresso, their morning ritual unchanged despite the expansion from personal habit to professional partnership. "Never," Elena replied, accepting her coffee and leaning into his warmth. "Just gratitude, for all of it, for you believing in this dream before I was brave enough to voice it." Below them, the foundation's first cohort of designers, 12 artists from 6 countries, gathered in the main hall that Elena had designed to feel like a welcoming home rather than intimidating institution. They carried portfolios and nervous energy, and the same hope Elena had brought to Seoul 18 months earlier, when she was running from disappointment toward possibility. "Your father called this morning," Elena mentioned, though Jae-hyun's calls had become routine rather than source of tension. "He wanted to congratulate us on the foundation launch and mention that 3 major European firms have reached out about potential partnerships." "Of course they have," Min-jun smiled. "Your reputation for transforming corporate spaces while honoring cultural values has spread faster than any marketing campaign we could have designed." The wedding had been smaller than traditional expectations for a Chaebol heir. Only family and close friends gathered in a garden ceremony that honored both Korean traditions and Italian customs. Elena had worn her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly, but retaining its vintage Italian lace. Min-jun had written his vows in both Korean and English, his voice steady as he promised to build a future that honored both their dreams. Soo-jin had been Elena's maid of honor, their professional relationship having evolved into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to Min-jun's well-being. Marco had attended as well, his initial romantic pursuit having transformed into professional admiration and eventual friendship with both of them. He now served as the foundation's European liaison, helping Italian designers navigate Korean business culture, just as Elena had learned to do. "The morning briefing is ready," Soo-jin announced, appearing on the balcony with her usual efficient punctuality. The board is excited to hear the foundation's first quarterly projections. "Give us 5 more minutes," Minjun requested, and Sujin nodded understanding. She had learned to recognize the moments when her employers needed time to simply be husband and wife rather than CEO and foundation director. Elena looked out at Seoul's endless skyline, at the construction cranes that moved like mechanical herons against the morning sky, at the city that had taught her that the most beautiful transformations happened when people were brave enough to build something entirely new, instead of settling for what they thought they were supposed to want. "Do you ever miss it?" Minjun asked quietly. "The simplicity of what Marco offered? Partnership without complications? Love without board meetings and security details?" Elena considered the question seriously, as she always did when Minjun needed reassurance that their choices had been worth the complexity they brought. "I miss the idea of simplicity sometimes," she admitted. "But I've learned that the most meaningful things in life are rarely simple. They're worth the complications because they create something that couldn't exist any other way." She turned to face him, seeing in his expression the same contentment she felt. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of purpose shared with someone who understood the value of building something together. "Besides," she added with the kind of smile that had first convinced him to trust her with his carefully guarded heart, "where else would I find someone willing to turn a corporate empire into a platform for international artistic collaboration? Where else would I find someone brave enough to turn a fortress into a home?" Minjun replied, pulling her closer until they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city that had brought them together. Below them, Seoul pulsed with its eternal energy of transformation and possibility. The foundation's young designers were beginning their orientation, learning how to navigate cultural differences while honoring their artistic visions. Somewhere in Choi Tower, board meetings were starting with agendas that balanced profit with purpose. Across the city, construction continued on projects that would house families and businesses and dreams not yet imagined. Elena and Minjun stood together in the morning light, two people who had learned that the greatest luxury wasn't wealth or security, or even love itself, but the courage to build something extraordinary with someone who saw the same possibilities in tomorrow that you did. Their coffee grew cold as they watched Seoul wake up around them, but neither moved to go inside. After all, they had learned that the most important business of any day was taking time to appreciate what they had built together. Not just the foundation or the company or the marriage, but the understanding that transformation was always possible for those brave enough to choose love over fear, partnership over isolation, hope over the safety of familiar limitations. In the distance, an airplane traced a silver line across the morning sky, carrying passengers toward destinations unknown. Elena smiled, remembering Minjun's childhood dream of flying people to impossible places, understanding that he had found his own way of making that dream real. Not through piloting aircraft, but through creating opportunities that helped people discover territories of possibility they had never imagined existed. As the foundation's first day officially began, Elena and Minjun finally returned inside, ready to continue building the kind of legacy that proved love wasn't just a personal luxury, but the foundation for everything valuable they would ever accomplish in the world. If Elena and Minjun's journey from guarded professionalism to courageous love has touched your heart, the best way to support our channel is by subscribing and activating notifications to never miss our future stories that explore how love can transform not just individual lives, but entire approaches to success, family, and what it truly means to build something lasting together. Click the video on your screen to discover another emotional drama where cultural differences become bridges rather than barriers, and where choosing love proves to be the most profitable investment of all.